The scream tore through the great hall before anyone could stop it. Elira stood frozen in the center of the stone floor, hundreds of eyes locked on her, and for one terrible moment, she thought her heart might simply give out from the weight of their stares. The bonding fire in front of her had gone cold. It was not supposed to go cold. Every wolf who stepped before that fire felt it roar higher, brighter, as their spirit answered the call of the pack. Hers had done nothing. No flicker, no warmth, just ash and silence, and 100 whispers rising like smoke around her. "She has no wolf," someone said from the crowd, loud enough to carry. The word spread through the hall faster than fire itself. Elira pressed her hands together to stop them from shaking. She had spent 18 years hiding from this exact moment, hoping that somehow, on this night, something inside her would finally answer. It hadn't. It never had. At the head of the hall, seated on a throne carved from black oak, Alpha King Draven watched her with an expression she had learned to fear more than any beast in these lands. It was not anger. It was worse. It was disappointment mixed with disgust, the look a man gives something broken that he wishes had never existed. "Come forward," he said. His voice did not rise, yet it silenced the entire hall instantly. Elira's legs felt like they belonged to someone else as she walked toward him. She kept her eyes down, the way she had been taught since she was old enough to understand that people like her were meant to be small, quiet, and grateful, simply to be allowed inside the walls of the kingdom. "Look at me," Draven commanded. She lifted her chin. Up close, his eyes were the color of storm clouds, sharp and merciless. 18 years, he said, loud enough for the entire hall to hear. 18 years, I have let you live under my protection, hoping you would prove yourself more than a burden. Tonight you had one chance to show this pack that you belong among us, and you failed in front of everyone. I did not choose this, Elira said quietly. Her voice trembled, but she forced the words out anyway. No one chooses to be born without a wolf. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, cruel and quick. Draven raised a hand, and the hall fell silent again in an instant, the kind of silence that came only from absolute obedience. "A wolf without a wolf," he said, shaking his head slowly, as though the very idea offended him. "You are a stain on this kingdom, Elira, a reminder of weakness we cannot afford to keep close. I will not have my pack question my strength, because I sheltered someone who carries none of her own." Elira felt something crack open inside her chest, sharp and hot. "I have served this kingdom since I was a child," she said. "I have worked in the kitchens, tended the wounded, carried water to the training grounds every single day without complaint. I have never asked for anything. And yet you have taken everything," Draven snapped. "Food, shelter, protection, all given freely to someone who offers this pack nothing in return. Tonight proves it. You are not one of us." The crowd murmured its agreement, a low current of voices rising and falling like a tide. Elira searched the faces around her, hoping to find even one person who might speak on her behalf, one voice that remembered her kindness, her quiet years of service. She found nothing but curious eyes and folded arms, people relieved that tonight's humiliation belonged to someone other than themselves. "Please," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. "I have nowhere else to go." Draven rose from his throne. He was tall, broad-shouldered, every inch of him built for command, and when he stepped down toward her, the entire hall seemed to lean back to make room for his presence. "That is no longer my concern," he said. He turned to the guards standing near the entrance, 2 men in dark leather armor who straightened the moment his gaze fell on them. "Take her to the edge of the Whisperwood," Draven ordered. "She does not set foot inside these walls again." The Whisperwood. Elira's stomach dropped at the name. Every child in the kingdom grew up hearing stories about that forest, tales meant to frighten them into obedience. Wolves that wandered too close to its border vanished. Hunters who entered never returned the same, if they returned at all. It was not simply a forest. It was a warning, whispered around fires for generations. "You cannot mean that," Elira said, her voice breaking now, all pretense of composure gone. "No one survives the Whisperwood alone." "Then perhaps you will finally prove useful," Draven said coldly, "by disappearing quietly instead of dragging down everyone around you." The guards moved toward her, before she could speak again, gripping her arms with practiced efficiency, the kind that came from doing something many times before. She did not fight them. There was no point. Fighting had never once worked in her favor. Not in this hall, not in this kingdom, not in this life she had been handed without her consent. As they pulled her toward the great doors, she looked back one final time at Draven, hoping to see even a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. There was none. He had already turned away, already moving on to whatever mattered more to him than the fate of the girl he was casting into darkness. The night air outside hit her like a slap, cold and sharp after the heat of the hall. The guards marched her through the kingdom's outer paths, past sleeping houses and silent fields, until the trees of the Whisperwood rose ahead of them, black against a moonless sky. Even from this distance, Illyra could feel something strange radiating from the forest, a pressure against her skin she could not explain. "This is as far as we go," one of the guards said, releasing her arm. "Please," Illyra said, turning to him, searching his face for any trace of mercy. "You know me. I helped tend your wound after the border skirmish last winter. Please don't leave me here." The guard's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Orders were orders, and questioning the Alpha King's judgment was not something anyone in this kingdom did lightly, not if they wanted to keep their place among the pack. "Go," the other guard said, his tone gentler, but no less final. "Before something worse than the forest finds you standing at its edge." They turned and walked away without looking back, their footsteps fading quickly into the darkness, leaving Illyra alone at the border between the world she knew and the one that had swallowed so many before her. For a long moment, she simply stood there, staring at the trees, feeling the weight of everything that had happened crash over her all at once. 18 years of trying to prove she belonged. 18 years of small kindnesses and quiet service, all of it erased in a single night because of something she had never been able to control. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. Somewhere beneath the fear and the hurt, a new feeling was beginning to stir, something sharper and colder than sadness. It felt almost like anger, but not quite. It felt like the first crack in a wall she had spent her entire life building around her heart. A wall made of every insult, every dismissive glance, every reminder that she was less than everyone around her. She thought of her mother, gone since she was small, who used to tell her that everyone carried something powerful inside them, even if it took years to find. She thought of the years spent hoping her wolf would simply appear one day, proving everyone wrong. She thought of Draven's cold eyes, the ease with which he had thrown away 18 years of her life without a second thought. The wind picked up, carrying a strange scent from deep within the trees, something wild and ancient that she could not name. For the first time since the guards had left her, Illyra felt something other than fear when she looked at the forest. She felt curiosity, sharp and sudden, cutting through the numbness that had settled over her since the bonding fire went cold. She took a step forward. The trees seemed to shift slightly as she approached, though there was no wind strong enough to move them. Shadows pooled between the trunks, thick and endless, swallowing the moonlight before it could reach the ground. Every instinct told her to turn back, to find somewhere safer to wait out the night, but there was nowhere else to go. The kingdom had made that clear. This forest, terrifying as it was, might be the only place left willing to take her in. She stepped past the first line of trees, and the world behind her disappeared almost instantly, swallowed by darkness and silence, so complete it pressed against her ears like a physical weight. The temperature dropped several degrees the moment she crossed the threshold, and goosebumps rose along her arms despite the layers of clothing she wore. "This is madness," she whispered to herself, her voice sounding strange and small in the vast quiet around her. Still, she kept walking. There was nothing behind her worth returning to, and something about the forest, despite every warning she had ever heard, did not feel entirely hostile. It felt watchful, patient, as though it were simply waiting to see what she would do next. Roots twisted across the ground, forcing her to move carefully, one hand occasionally reaching out to steady herself against the rough bark of ancient trees. The deeper she walked, the stranger the forest became. The trees here were unlike any she had seen near the kingdom, their trunks wider than 3 men standing shoulder to shoulder, their branches stretching so high she could not see where they ended. A sound broke the silence, distant and low, a howl that rolled through the trees like thunder. Illyra froze instantly, her breath catching in her throat. The howl was unlike anything she had heard before, deeper and more resonant than any wolf's cry from the kingdom, carrying a weight that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath her feet. She waited, heart pounding, for the sound to come again. When it didn't, she forced herself to keep moving, telling herself that stopping in the open would only make her more vulnerable if something dangerous was nearby. Hours seemed to pass, though she had no way to measure the time in the endless darkness beneath the canopy. Her legs ached, her feet were sore inside her worn boots, and hunger had begun to gnaw steadily at her stomach. She found a small clearing eventually, a circle of soft moss surrounded by trees, and decided it would have to serve as a resting place for the night. She sat down slowly, pulling her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them for warmth and comfort in equal measure. The forest around her hummed with unfamiliar sounds, rustling leaves, distant calls of creatures she could not identify, the occasional snap of a branch that sent her heart racing each time. Despite the fear coursing through her, exhaustion eventually won out, and her eyelids grew heavy. Just before sleep claimed her, she felt it again, that strange pull in her chest she had noticed earlier, faint but unmistakable, as though something deep in the forest had noticed her arrival and was reaching out to acknowledge it. She did not know what it meant. She only knew that for the first time, in longer than she could remember, something inside her had responded to the world around her, instead of remaining silent and empty. Sleep took her before she could think any further on it, and the forest settled into its watchful quiet around the girl, curled alone in the moss, unaware of what stirred beneath the surface of her own heart, waiting patiently for the moment it would finally wake. Morning arrived without warning, a pale gray light filtering weakly through the thick canopy overhead. Illyra woke stiff and cold, her body aching from the uneven ground, and for a moment she forgot where she was. Then the memory of the previous night crashed back over her, the bonding fire, Draven's cold judgment, the long walk into darkness, and she felt the hollow ache of it settle once more into her chest. She sat up slowly, brushing leaves and dirt from her clothes, and looked around the clearing in the daylight for the first time. It was beautiful in a way she had not expected, sunlight filtering through gaps in the branches, casting shifting patterns across the moss and undergrowth. Birds called somewhere above, their songs strange but not unpleasant, and for a brief moment, Illyra almost forgot the danger she had been warned was hiding within these trees. Hunger reminded her quickly enough that survival, not sightseeing, needed to be her priority. She had no supplies, no weapons beyond a small knife tucked into her boot, and no knowledge of which plants in this forest might be safe to eat. Every choice she made now could mean the difference between surviving another day and becoming another cautionary tale whispered around kingdom fires. She rose to her feet, wincing at the soreness in her legs, and began to walk again, following what looked like a faint trail winding between the trees. As she moved deeper into the forest, that strange pull in her chest returned, stronger now than it had been the night before, drawing her steadily in a direction she had not consciously chosen. She told herself she should resist it. That instinct alone was not enough reason to walk further into unknown danger. Yet something about the pull felt less like a threat and more like recognition, as though some part of her already understood where she needed to go, even if the rest of her mind had not yet caught up. The trail led her toward a ridge overlooking a shallow valley, and from the top of it, Illyra could see the forest stretching endlessly in every direction, an ocean of green broken only by distant hints of rocky outcroppings, and, far in the distance, what looked like the faint glimmer of water catching the morning light. It was the most beautiful and most terrifying view she had ever seen. Beautiful because nothing in the kingdom had ever shown her anything like this vast, untamed wilderness. Terrifying because she was utterly alone within it, with no idea how to survive even one more day, let alone the rest of her life. She sat down on a flat stone near the ridge's edge, allowing herself a moment to simply breathe, to process everything that had happened in the span of less than a day. Her entire world had been upended. Everything familiar, painful as much of it had been, was gone now, replaced by uncertainty in every direction. A twig snapped somewhere behind her. Illyra's entire body went rigid, every nerve suddenly alert. She turned slowly, scanning the trees behind her, searching for the source of the sound. Nothing moved. The forest had gone unnaturally quiet, the bird song from earlier completely silenced, as though every living creature nearby had suddenly decided to hold its breath. "Hello?" she called out, immediately regretting it. If something dangerous was watching her, announcing her exact location seemed like the last thing she should be doing. Silence answered her. She rose slowly to her feet, her hand instinctively reaching for the small knife in her boot, though she doubted it would offer much protection against anything large enough to move that quietly through the underbrush. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she scanned the trees again, searching for any sign of movement. There, between two massive trunks, roughly 20 paces away, a shape shifted in the shadows. Illyra's breath caught in her throat. It was large, far larger than any wolf she had ever seen within the kingdom's walls, its fur dark as midnight, its eyes catching the dim light with an unsettling golden glow. She should have run. Every instinct screamed at her to turn and flee back toward the trail, back toward whatever safety the open ridge might offer. Instead, she found herself frozen in place, staring at the creature as it stepped fully into view, its massive frame moving with a fluid grace that seemed almost impossible for something so large. The wolf stopped several paces away, studying her with an intensity that felt less like a predator sizing up prey, and more like something else entirely, something closer to recognition. Illyra's heart continued to race, but the fear coursing through her began to shift, slowly, into something else, something that felt, impossibly, almost like relief. "What are you?" she whispered, though she knew the creature could not answer. The wolf tilted its massive head slightly, its golden eyes never leaving hers. Then, slowly, it lowered itself to the ground, folding its enormous body down until it was resting on the forest floor, still watching her with that same unreadable intensity. Illyra remained frozen for a long moment, uncertain what to make of the creature's sudden calm. Every story she had ever heard about the Whisperwood spoke of danger, of wolves too large and too wild to be reasoned with. Yet this creature, despite its overwhelming size, showed no signs of aggression. If anything, it seemed almost patient, as though it were waiting for her to make the next move. Slowly, carefully, she took a single step closer. The wolf did not react beyond a slight flick of its ear, tracking the sound of her movement. Encouraged, though she could not entirely explain why, Illyra took another step, then another, until she was standing only a few paces away from the massive creature. Up close, its size was even more staggering. Its shoulders alone reached nearly to her chest, and its paws were larger than her own hands spread wide. Yet despite everything about its appearance that should have terrified her, Illyra felt something else entirely as she stood before it. That same strange pull she had felt since entering the forest, now stronger than ever, pulsing steadily somewhere deep inside her chest. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why do I feel like I know you?" The wolf's golden eyes seemed to soften, if such a thing were possible for a creature so wild. It rose slowly from its resting position, and, to Illyra's astonishment, stepped forward until its massive head was nearly level with her own, close enough that she could feel the warmth of its breath against her skin. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The forest around them remained silent, holding its breath alongside them, as though the entire world understood the significance of whatever was happening between the exiled girl and the enormous wolf that had chosen, for reasons she could not yet comprehend, to approach her, instead of every other creature that might have wandered into its territory. Then, gently, the wolf lowered its head and pressed its massive nose against her outstretched hand. Warmth exploded through Illyra's entire body, spreading outward from the point of contact, like fire racing through dry grass. She gasped, stumbling backward, but the wolf remained still, watching her with what could only be described as patience, as she struggled to process the sensation coursing through her. It felt like waking up after a lifetime of sleep. It felt like a door opening somewhere deep inside her, that she had not even known existed. Everything about the empty, hollow space she had carried in her chest since childhood, the space where a wolf's presence should have lived but never had, suddenly felt different, fuller, alive. "What is happening to me?" She gasped, pressing a hand against her chest, feeling her own heartbeat pounding wildly beneath her palm. The wolf simply watched her, golden eyes patient and knowing, as though it understood exactly what was happening even if she did not, as though it had been waiting for this exact moment, far longer than she could possibly imagine. Elira sank slowly to her knees, overwhelmed by the sensation still spreading through her, warmth and power, and something that felt unmistakably like recognition, like two pieces of the same whole finally coming together after being separated for far too long. Whatever had been missing inside her for 18 years, whatever emptiness had made her the outcast, the failure, the one who brought shame to a kingdom that never wanted her, it was stirring now, awakening slowly beneath the watchful gaze of a creature far larger and far more powerful than anything she had ever imagined could exist. The forest around them remained silent, patient, as though it too understood that something significant was beginning here, something that would change everything Elira thought she knew about herself and the world that had cast her aside. She did not yet understand what was happening. She only knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that she was no longer entirely alone, and that whatever waited for her deeper within this ancient forest, it was only the beginning of something far greater than the empty, wolfless existence she had been forced to leave behind. Elira did not know how long she knelt there in the clearing, one hand still pressed against her chest, feeling the strange new warmth pulse beneath her skin, like a second heartbeat. The massive wolf remained beside her, patient and silent, its golden eyes watching every small movement she made, as though guarding something precious. When she finally found the strength to look up, the wolf tilted its head and let out a low sound, not quite a growl, not quite a whine, something in between that seemed almost like a question. Elira shook her head slowly, still trying to catch her breath. "I don't know what just happened," she admitted. "I have never felt anything like this before." The wolf rose to its feet and took a few steps away from her, then paused and looked back, as though inviting her to follow. Elira hesitated only a moment before pushing herself upright, her legs still unsteady beneath her. Whatever this creature was, whatever strange connection had just formed between them, she felt an unmistakable trust settling into her chest, a certainty that this wolf meant her no harm. She followed it through the trees, weaving between ancient trunks and over roots thick as her own arms, moving deeper into a part of the forest that felt different from where she had slept the night before. The air here seemed to hum faintly, a vibration she could feel more than hear, and strange markings, old and weathered, were carved into some of the larger trees they passed. After what felt like nearly an hour of walking, the trees began to thin, and Elira found herself standing at the edge of a wide clearing, unlike anything she had expected to find hidden within a forest, so feared by the outside world. Small wooden structures stood scattered across the clearing, built with a craftsmanship that suggested decades, perhaps centuries, of careful work. Smoke rose gently from a few chimneys, and figures moved between the buildings, going about tasks that looked almost ordinary, despite the extraordinary setting. People lived here, wolves lived here. The forest that every story warned was death itself, held within it a hidden community that no one in the kingdom seemed to know existed. The massive wolf beside her let out a loud, resonant howl, and heads turned immediately throughout the clearing. Elira froze, suddenly aware of how exposed she was, standing at the tree line with dozens of unfamiliar eyes now fixed on her. An older woman approached first, moving with a calm confidence that immediately marked her as someone of importance within this hidden settlement. Her hair was silver, braided elaborately, and her eyes held a sharpness that suggested she missed very little of what happened around her. "You brought a stranger, Cade," the woman said, addressing the massive wolf directly, her tone carrying both surprise and curiosity. Cade, so the wolf had a name, one this woman clearly knew. Elira filed the information away, uncertain what it meant but sensing it was significant. "I am sorry," Elira said quickly, taking an instinctive step backward. "I did not mean to intrude. I was cast out of my kingdom, and I did not know where else to go." The older woman's expression shifted the moment Elira mentioned being cast out, softening slightly with something that looked almost like understanding. She studied Elira for a long moment, her sharp eyes moving over every detail, before her gaze settled on the spot where Elira's hand still rested against her chest. "You feel it, don't you?" the woman said. It was not a question, the awakening. Alira's eyes widened. How did you know? Because I have seen it before, the woman said, though not in many years. Come, we have much to discuss, and precious little time in which to discuss it. She turned and walked toward the largest of the wooden structures, without waiting to see if Alira would follow. Cade nudged Alira gently with his massive head, urging her forward, and after a moment's hesitation, she followed the woman across the clearing, painfully aware of the curious stares following her every step. Inside the structure, warm light from a small fire illuminated shelves lined with old books, dried herbs hanging from the rafters, and strange objects Alira could not immediately identify. The woman gestured toward a wooden chair near the fire, and Alira sat, grateful for the chance to finally rest her aching legs. My name is Marin, the woman said, settling into a chair across from her. I am one of the elders here. This settlement has existed hidden within the Whisperwood for longer than any kingdom outside these trees remembers. We are the ones cast aside, forgotten, and hunted by packs who fear what they do not understand. I don't understand any of this, Alira admitted. I was born without a wolf. Everyone in my kingdom always said I was broken, incomplete. And then last night, that wolf, Cade, he touched my hand, and something happened. Something woke up inside me. Marin nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. You were never wolfless, child. What you experienced your entire life was not the absence of a wolf spirit, but its suppression. Someone bound your wolf, kept it dormant, kept it silent, so completely that even you believed it did not exist. Alira's breath caught. Bound? By who? Why would anyone do that to me? That, Marin said, leaning forward slightly, her expression turning grave, is a question with an answer far older and far more dangerous than you realize. Before she could continue, the door to the structure opened, and Cade padded inside, settling himself on the floor near Alira's chair with the easy familiarity of a creature entirely comfortable in this space. Marin glanced at him fondly, before returning her attention to Alira. Cade has lived in this forest for many years, Marin said. He was once bonded to a wolf of great power himself, though circumstances long ago separated them. Since then, he has wandered these woods, watching, waiting, though none of us understood exactly what he was waiting for. Until now. You think he was waiting for me? Alira asked, glancing down at the enormous wolf, who lifted his head and met her gaze with those same patient golden eyes. I believe your bloodline carries an old power, Marin said carefully. One that predates even the ruling families of the kingdoms outside this forest. Long ago, before the first Alpha Kings claimed their thrones, there existed wolves of a different kind, older, stronger, tied not to conquest but to balance, to the forest itself. Their bloodlines were feared by those who sought to build kingdoms through strength and dominance alone, because a bloodline that could not be controlled through fear was a bloodline that threatened everything those early rulers had built. Alira sat in stunned silence, trying to absorb everything Marin was telling her. You are saying my family, whoever they were, threatened the Alpha King somehow? I am saying it is possible, Marin said. Bindings such as the one placed on you require significant power and significant reason. Such magic is not used lightly, nor is it used against those considered insignificant. If someone bound your wolf so thoroughly that it remained hidden even from you for 18 years, they did so because they feared what would happen if it ever woke. A chill ran down Alira's spine as she thought back to the bonding fire, to the moment it had failed to respond to her presence, to Draven's cold, calculated disappointment as he cast her out in front of the entire kingdom. Had he known? Had he always known there was something dangerous buried inside her, something worth suppressing rather than simply accepting? What happens now? She asked quietly. If my wolf really has started to wake, what does that mean? Marin's expression grew serious. It means you have much to learn, and very little time in which to learn it. A binding as old and as powerful as the one placed on you does not simply vanish overnight. What you felt with Cade was only the first crack in that binding, not its complete destruction. Left untrained, an awakening wolf spirit as powerful as I suspect yours to be could overwhelm you entirely, or worse, draw attention from those who placed the binding in the first place before you are ready to face them. Alira swallowed hard. You mean Draven, if he finds out. If he finds out, Marin agreed. He will not simply let the matter rest. A bloodline capable of producing a wolf spirit strong enough to threaten his own authority is not something an alpha king ignores, especially not one as protective of his power as I understand Draven to be. The weight of everything Marin had said settled heavily over Alira. Only a day ago, she had been nothing more than the wolfless girl, an embarrassment tolerated within the kingdom's walls, simply because there had been nowhere else to send her. Now she was being told that her very existence carried a threat significant enough to warrant ancient, powerful magic being used against her, before she was even old enough to understand what she carried inside her. Why would they let me live at all, if they were so afraid of what I might become? She asked. Perhaps they believed the binding would hold forever, Marin said. Perhaps they hoped that by keeping you close, humiliated and dismissed, they could ensure you never grew strong enough or confident enough to challenge what had been done to you. Fear and shame are powerful chains, child. Sometimes far more effective than any physical binding. Alira thought of the years spent believing she was broken, believing her worth was measured entirely by something she could never control. She thought of every cruel word, every dismissive glance, every reminder from Draven and his court that she was less than everyone around her. All of it, perhaps, carefully cultivated to keep her small, to keep her quiet, to keep whatever power slept inside her from ever having the chance to wake. Something hardened in her chest at the realization, a resolve she had never allowed herself to feel before. If what Marin said was true, then her exile had not been a punishment for failing to prove herself. It had been, perhaps, a mistake born of arrogance, the assumption that casting her into the Whisperwood would either kill her or simply remove an inconvenient reminder of a threat long buried and forgotten. Instead, it had led her directly to the one place where that binding might finally be broken. I want to learn, Alira said, meeting Marin's eyes with newfound determination. Whatever this power is, whatever my wolf is capable of, I want to understand it. I want to control it. I do not want to spend the rest of my life being told I am less than I actually am. Marin studied her for a long moment, a small, approving smile finally breaking across her weathered face. Good. That is precisely the answer I hoped to hear. Power without purpose is dangerous, but power guided by resolve, that is something worth cultivating. She rose from her chair and moved toward one of the shelves lining the wall, retrieving an old, leather-bound book that looked as though it had survived many decades of careful handling. She set it on the small table between them and opened it to a page marked with a faded ribbon. This settlement has trained wolves whose spirits were suppressed or damaged for many years, Marin said. It will not be easy. The process of fully awakening a bound wolf spirit is often painful, both physically and otherwise, but if your bloodline is what I suspect it to be, the wolf waiting inside you is unlike anything this forest has seen in generations. Cade lifted his head from where he had been resting quietly on the floor and let out a low sound, almost like agreement, his golden eyes fixed on Alira, with an intensity that made her feel, for the first time in longer than she could remember, that she was truly seen. Where do we begin? Alira asked. We begin, Marin said, by finding out exactly what you are capable of. Over the following hours, Marin explained the basic structure of the settlement, the community of exiled and hidden wolves who had built a life for themselves deep within the feared Whisperwood, protected by old magic that kept most outsiders from ever finding their way this deep into the trees. She spoke of the careful balance they maintained, hunting only what they needed, disturbing the forest as little as possible, living in a harmony that stood in stark contrast to the aggressive expansion and conquest that defined the kingdoms beyond the tree line. Alira listened, absorbing every detail, feeling the shape of an entirely new world forming around her, one built on principles she had never encountered within Draven's kingdom. Here, strength was not measured by dominance over others, but by the ability to protect and sustain a community. Here, difference was not treated as shameful, but simply as another thread woven into the fabric of a much larger tapestry. By the time evening fell, and Marin finally suggested she rest, Alira's mind was spinning with everything she had learned, everything that had shifted in the span of a single day. She was led to a small structure near the edge of the settlement, simple but warm, with a bed of soft furs and a small fire already crackling in the corner. Cade followed her inside without invitation, settling himself near the fire with the easy comfort of a creature entirely at home. Elira watched him for a long moment before sitting down on the edge of the bed, exhaustion finally beginning to catch up with her after the events of the past 2 days. "I don't fully understand any of this," she said quietly, more to herself than to the wolf resting nearby. "But for the first time in my life, I don't feel like I'm the mistake everyone always told me I was." Cade lifted his head briefly, golden eyes meeting hers across the small room, before settling back down with what almost looked like contentment. Elira allowed herself a small, tired smile, the first genuine smile she had managed since the bonding fire had gone cold in front of the entire kingdom. Whatever waited for her in the days ahead, whatever challenges came with learning to control a power ancient enough to have once threatened the throne itself, she would face them here, in this hidden sanctuary, surrounded by people who did not see her as broken. She lay back against the soft furs, the warmth of the fire slowly easing the tension from her tired muscles, and allowed her eyes to close. Sleep came more easily than she expected, carrying with it dreams of golden eyes and ancient forests, of power finally beginning to stir after 18 long years of forced silence. Somewhere far beyond the borders of the Whisperwood, within the cold stone walls of his own kingdom, Alpha King Draven had no idea that the girl he cast aside without a second thought was, at that very moment, taking the first steps toward becoming something far more powerful than he had ever imagined possible. A sharp pain shot through Elira's chest, so sudden and so fierce that she gasped and doubled over, her hands pressing hard against her ribs, as though she could somehow hold herself together through sheer force of will. "Breathe through it," Marin instructed calmly from where she stood a few paces away. "The pain means the binding is weakening further. Fighting against it only makes the process harder." 3 days had passed since Elira arrived at the hidden settlement, and each one had brought new sensations she struggled to understand. Waves of heat and cold moving through her body without warning, moments where her vision sharpened so suddenly that ordinary daylight felt blinding, and now, this deep, aching pain that radiated outward from somewhere near her heart. She forced herself to straighten, drawing in a slow breath despite the discomfort, and nodded at Marin to continue. They stood together in a small clearing near the edge of the settlement. One Marin had explained was used specifically for training newly awakening wolves, its ground marked with old symbols worn smooth by decades of use. "The binding placed on you was designed to suppress not just your wolf's presence but its very growth," Marin explained, circling Elira slowly, studying her with careful, assessing eyes. "For 18 years, your spirit has been trying to grow within a space far too small to contain it. Now that the binding has begun to crack, that suppressed growth is trying to happen all at once, which is why the pain has been so intense." "How much longer will this last?" Elira asked, wincing as another wave of heat rolled through her chest. "That depends entirely on you," Marin said. "The faster you learn to work with your wolf, rather than resist the changes happening within you, the faster this initial phase will pass. Resistance only prolongs the discomfort." Cade sat nearby, watching the exchange with quiet attentiveness, as he had done every day since Elira's arrival. He rarely left her side, except when Marin insisted on private conversations, and even then, Elira often found him waiting patiently, just outside whatever structure she occupied, as though some invisible thread bound them together now that could not easily be severed. "Show me again," Elira said, straightening despite the lingering ache in her chest. "The exercise from yesterday." Marin nodded approvingly and gestured for her to close her eyes. "Reach inward. Do not force anything. Simply acknowledge what is there and allow it to respond to your presence, the way you might greet someone you have not seen in many years." Elira closed her eyes and did as instructed, focusing inward past the physical discomfort, searching for that strange warmth she had first felt when Cade touched his nose to her hand. It took a moment to find it, buried beneath layers of fear and years of believing it did not exist. But eventually she located it, a small, steady flame flickering somewhere deep within her chest. "Hello," she thought, feeling almost foolish for speaking silently to a part of herself she barely understood. The flame flickered in response, and warmth spread outward through her body, gentler this time than the sharp pain from moments before. Elira kept her eyes closed, focusing on maintaining the connection, on acknowledging the presence, rather than pushing it away out of fear or confusion. "Good," Marin said quietly, her voice carrying a note of genuine surprise. "Open your eyes, child." Elira did, and gasped at what she saw. Her own hands, held up in front of her, had begun to shift, fine dark fur spreading briefly across her skin, before receding just as quickly, leaving her fingers trembling in the aftermath. "What was that?" she breathed. "The very beginning of a shift," Marin said, unable to fully hide the astonishment in her voice. "Most wolves take weeks, sometimes months, before their spirits grow strong enough to attempt even a partial change. You have managed it in 3 days." Elira stared at her own hands, still shaking slightly, trying to process what had just happened. "Is that good, or is that dangerous?" "Both," Marin admitted honestly. "It confirms what I suspected about your bloodline, that the power within you is extraordinary, but it also means you must be trained carefully and quickly before that power grows beyond what you are prepared to control." Over the following days, Elira's training intensified. Marin worked with her from dawn until well past dusk, teaching her to recognize the different sensations associated with her wolf's growing presence, distinguishing between the pain of the binding weakening and the natural growing pains of a spirit finally allowed to develop as it should have from birth. Other members of the settlement began to take notice of her progress as well. Word spread quickly through the small community about the girl who had arrived wolfless and was now, in a matter of days, showing signs of power that veteran members of the settlement had not witnessed in years, if ever. A young man named Corwin, who Elira learned had lived in the settlement his entire life after his own family was exiled generations ago, approached her one afternoon as she practiced controlling small shifts in a quiet corner of the training clearing. "They say you managed a partial shift on your 3rd day," he said, watching her with open curiosity. "It took me nearly 2 months before I managed anything close to that. I don't fully understand it myself," Elira admitted, flexing her fingers, watching for any sign of the fur that had appeared and disappeared so quickly during her earlier session with Marin. "It feels like my body is remembering something it always should have known, rather than learning something new." "That makes sense, given what Marin told the elders about your bloodline," Corwin said, settling onto a nearby log. "There are old stories about wolves like yours, the kind that predate the Alpha Kings entirely. Some say they were tied directly to the forest itself, not bound by pack hierarchy the way most wolves are today." "What happened to them?" Elira asked. "If they existed before the Alpha Kings, why haven't I ever heard of them?" Corwin's expression grew thoughtful. "History has a way of forgetting what those in power want forgotten. If the early Alpha Kings feared what those bloodlines represented, it would make sense that they worked hard to erase all record of their existence, binding what wolves remained, scattering their descendants, making sure the knowledge never survived long enough to threaten the new order they were building." Elira absorbed this information silently, thinking of her own family, people she had never known, parents who died when she was too young to remember them clearly. Had they known about the power sleeping within her? Had they been part of some effort to protect this ancient bloodline, only to fail before she was old enough to understand any of it? "Do you know anything about my parents?" she asked quietly. "Marin has not mentioned them, and I never learned much growing up beyond the fact that they died shortly after I was born." Corwin shook his head slowly. "I am sorry, I don't know anything specific. But if you would like, I could ask some of the older members of the settlement. Some of them have lived here for many decades. They might remember something, even if it is only a fragment." "I would appreciate that," Elira said, grateful for the offer, despite the uncertainty it carried. Part of her feared what she might learn, feared discovering that her parents had been deliberately targeted, perhaps even killed, because of the very power now beginning to wake inside her. But another part of her needed to know, needed to understand the full weight of the history she carried within her own blood. As the days continued, Elira's training progressed steadily. She learned to control her partial shifts, extending them longer each time without losing focus, without allowing the overwhelming sensations to pull her under. Marin introduced her to combat forms as well, explaining that a wolf's physical strength meant little without the discipline to use it effectively. An untrained wolf, however powerful, is simply a liability, Marin explained one afternoon, as she demonstrated a defensive stance for Alira to practice. You must learn to move with intention, to strike with purpose, rather than raw instinct alone. Power without control is as dangerous to yourself as it is to any enemy you might face. Alira threw herself into every lesson with an intensity that surprised even her. 18 years of being told she was less than everyone around her had left a hunger inside her that she had never fully acknowledged until now, a desperate need to prove, if only to herself, that she was capable of more than the kingdom had ever believed possible. Cade remained a constant presence throughout her training, often positioning himself where he could watch her progress, occasionally offering what almost seemed like guidance, nudging her in a particular direction during combat drills, or letting out low sounds that Marin explained were his way of expressing approval, or, occasionally, gentle correction. He has never behaved this way with anyone else, Marin observed one evening as they watched Alira practice a series of controlled shifts near the settlement's central fire. Cade has lived among us for many years, always somewhat distant, never fully connecting with anyone, despite our best efforts to make him feel at home. Since your arrival, he has barely left your side. Do you know why? Alira asked, glancing over at the massive wolf, who sat watching the flickering flames with quiet patience. I have my theories, Marin said carefully, but some things are better discovered through experience than explanation. For now, focus on your training. Understanding will come in time. That night, as Alira lay in her small structure with Cade resting nearby as he had every night since her arrival, she found herself studying him more closely than she had before. There was something in the way he watched her, something beyond simple companionship, that suggested a deeper significance to their connection, one Marin seemed to understand, but had not yet fully explained. What are you, really? She asked quietly, more to herself than expecting an answer. To her surprise, Cade lifted his head and met her gaze directly, his golden eyes holding an intelligence that felt almost human in its depth. He held her gaze for a long moment before rising slowly and moving closer, settling down beside her bed instead of near the fire as he usually did. Alira reached out hesitantly and placed her hand against his massive head, feeling the warmth of his fur beneath her fingers. The moment her skin made contact, that same warm sensation from their first meeting spread through her chest, gentler now than it had been initially, but still unmistakably powerful. Whatever you are, she whispered, thank you for finding me. Cade let out a low, contented sound, his eyes closing briefly beneath her touch, and for the first time since arriving in the forest, Alira felt something settle fully within her, a sense of belonging she had never experienced within the walls of Draven's kingdom, despite 18 years spent trying desperately to earn it. The days continued to pass, each one bringing new progress, new lessons, new pieces of understanding about the power growing steadily within her. And though the pain of the weakening binding had not entirely disappeared, Alira found herself facing each new wave of discomfort with growing confidence rather than fear, trusting that whatever waited on the other side of this transformation would be worth every difficult moment required to reach it. Far beyond the borders of the Whisperwood, unaware of everything unfolding within the hidden settlement, Alpha King Draven continued his rule, secure in the belief that the wolfless girl he cast into the forest had either perished within its depths, or, at the very least, no longer posed any threat to the order he had worked so hard to maintain. He could not have been more wrong, and the day he would learn the truth was drawing steadily closer with every passing hour Alira spent growing into the power that had always been rightfully hers. 2 weeks into her training, Alira stood at the edge of the settlement's training clearing, staring at a target Corwin had set up nearly 40 paces away, a simple wooden post wrapped in old cloth. Her heart pounded, not from fear this time, but from anticipation. Whenever you are ready, Marin said, standing a safe distance behind her. Alira closed her eyes, reaching inward toward the warmth that now answered her call almost instantly, no longer buried beneath layers of fear and suppression, but readily available, eager even, to respond to her intention. She had spent 2 weeks learning to summon partial shifts, extending her control a little further each day, but today, Marin had decided she was ready to attempt something greater. She let the warmth spread through her entire body, no longer resisting the sensation but welcoming it, guiding it the way Marin had taught her, shaping the raw power into something controlled and purposeful. Her bones shifted, her senses sharpened, and within moments, standing where Alira had been only seconds before, was an enormous wolf, dark-furred and golden-eyed, nearly matching Cade in size. Gasps rippled through the small crowd of settlement members who had gathered to witness the attempt. Alira, in her wolf form, felt the world around her shift into sharper focus, colors and sounds intensifying in ways that felt both overwhelming and exhilarating. She looked down at her own massive paws, still hardly believing what she had accomplished. "Remarkable," Marin breathed, stepping closer, studying the transformed girl with open astonishment. Most wolves require months, sometimes years, to achieve a full shift after their initial awakening. You have done it in 2 weeks. Alira let out a low sound, testing her new voice in this form, before carefully approaching the target Corwin had set up. She moved differently now, 4 powerful legs carrying her with a grace that felt both foreign and instinctively familiar, as though her body had always known how to move this way, even if her conscious mind was only now catching up. She lunged toward the target, testing her speed, and was startled by how quickly the distance closed beneath her. Her jaws closed around the wrapped cloth with far more force than she intended, tearing it easily from the post, and she skidded to a stop several paces beyond, breathing hard, adrenaline coursing through her powerful new form. Applause and murmurs of amazement rose from the gathered crowd. Cade, who had been watching from a slight distance, approached slowly, circling her with obvious pride radiating from every movement, letting out a series of low sounds that Marin later explained were his way of expressing approval. "Shift back slowly," Marin instructed. "The return to your human form requires just as much control as the shift itself, particularly this early in your training." Alira concentrated, reaching for that same warmth, guiding it now in reverse, and felt her body shrinking, reshaping, until she stood once again on 2 legs, breathless but exhilarated, staring down at her own trembling hands. "I did it," she whispered, disbelief coloring her voice. "I actually did it." "You did," Marin confirmed, a rare, genuine smile spreading across her weathered face. "And in record time, your bloodline's power is proving itself with every passing day, child. What you accomplished today, most wolves spend years working toward." Corwin approached, grinning widely. "I told you the stories about your bloodline were not exaggerations. Wait until the others hear about this." Word of Alira's rapid progress spread quickly through the settlement over the following days. Members who had previously kept a respectful but cautious distance began approaching her more openly, curious about the girl whose power seemed to be growing at a pace none of them had witnessed before. Some regarded her with open admiration, others with a more cautious respect, aware that power such as hers, however impressive, also carried significant weight and potential danger. Marin, sensing the shifting dynamics within the settlement, called a private meeting with Alira one evening, sitting her down near the central fire once most of the community had retired for the night. "You must understand something important," Marin said, her expression serious in the flickering firelight. "Power such as yours does not remain hidden forever, no matter how carefully we protect this settlement. Word travels, even within a forest as remote as the whisper would. It is only a matter of time before whispers of a wolf your size, moving through these trees, reach ears beyond our borders." Alira felt a chill settle over her despite the warmth of the nearby fire. "You mean Draven might hear about me?" "I mean, it is a possibility we must prepare for," Marin said carefully. "Not immediately, perhaps, but eventually. Which is why your training must continue at this pace. Why you must learn not just to shift and fight, but to understand fully what you are capable of, so that if the day comes when you must face him again, you do so as someone fully in command of her own power, rather than the frightened, uncertain girl he cast out of his kingdom." The mention of Draven sent a complicated wave of emotion through Alira's chest, anger and fear intertwined with something else, something that felt almost like anticipation. She thought of his cold eyes, his casual cruelty, the ease with which he had discarded 18 years of her life without a second thought, believing her worthless simply because her wolf had remained hidden through no fault of her own. "I am not afraid of him," she said quietly. Though, even as she spoke the words, she recognized the small flicker of uncertainty still lingering beneath her resolve. Fear is not always a weakness, Marin said gently. Sometimes fear simply reminds us of what is at stake. What matters is that you do not let it control your choices. Use it instead to sharpen your focus, to remind yourself why this training matters so deeply. Over the following weeks, Alira's abilities continued to develop at a pace that astonished even the settlement's oldest members. She learned to control extended periods in her wolf form, mastering not just speed and strength, but subtler skills as well, tracking scents across great distances, communicating silently with other wolves through body language and low vocalizations, understanding the deep, instinctive language that connected her now to every wolf spirit around her. Cade remained her constant companion throughout every lesson, and Alira began noticing patterns in his behavior that suggested a depth of understanding beyond what she had initially assumed. He seemed to anticipate her struggles before Marin even needed to point them out, positioning himself to offer silent guidance, correcting her stance during combat drills with gentle nudges, always patient, always watchful. One afternoon, as they rested together near a quiet stream running through the eastern edge of the settlement's territory, Alira found herself studying him closely once more. Marin mentioned once that you were bonded to a powerful wolf before you came to this forest. What happened? Cade's ears flattened slightly, and for a long moment, he simply stared at the flowing water, his expression, as much as a wolf's expression could convey, carrying something that looked unmistakably like sorrow. I am sorry, Alira said quickly, sensing she had touched on something painful. You don't have to answer. Cade shifted closer to her instead, resting his massive head against her shoulder, and Alira wrapped an arm around him instinctively, feeling the weight of whatever loss he carried, even without fully understanding its details. Whatever had happened to separate him from his previous bond, it clearly still weighed heavily on him, even after however many years had passed since. Maybe someday you can tell me the whole story, she said softly, whenever you are ready. Cade let out a low, quiet sound, something that felt like gratitude, and remained close beside her as the afternoon sun filtered gently through the canopy above, casting warm patterns across the flowing water, and the two of them resting quietly together beside it. As her training progressed, Alira also began spending more time with the settlement's other residents, learning about the diverse histories that had brought each of them to this hidden sanctuary. Many, like Corwin, had been born within the settlement, descendants of families exiled generations ago for reasons ranging from minor rule violations to, in a few cases, bloodlines considered dangerous by ruling alpha kings, much like her own. Others had arrived as adults, cast out from their own kingdoms for various reasons, some fair, many deeply unjust. Listening to their stories, Alira began to understand more fully the scope of cruelty that existed within the structures of kingdom hierarchy, the way power was so often wielded carelessly against those least able to defend themselves. It reinforced something that had been growing steadily within her since her arrival, a resolve not just to master her own power, but to understand what kind of leader, what kind of wolf, she wanted to become once that power was fully realized. She did not want to become someone who ruled through fear and cruelty, the way Draven had ruled over her for 18 years. She wanted, instead, to embody something closer to what she saw within this hidden settlement: strength, paired with genuine care, power used to protect rather than to dominate. One evening, nearly a month after her arrival, Marin called Alira aside once more, her expression carrying a gravity that immediately put Alira on alert. There is news, Marin said carefully. Word has reached us through trusted channels. Draven's kingdom faces growing pressure from a rival pack along its eastern border. Tensions have been building for some time, and recent reports suggest the situation is escalating quickly. Alira absorbed this information, uncertain at first why it mattered to her. What does that have to do with us? Perhaps nothing, Marin admitted, or perhaps everything, depending on how desperate Draven becomes in the coming weeks. A weakened kingdom, facing external threats, often becomes far more aggressive in seeking any advantage it can find, including advantages it might have previously ignored or dismissed. A cold realization settled over Alira as she understood Marin's meaning. You think he might come looking for the wolf people have started whispering about, the one moving through these woods. It is a possibility we cannot ignore, Marin confirmed. Your training has progressed remarkably, faster than any of us anticipated, but I fear we may not have as much time to prepare as we originally hoped. Illyra felt her resolve harden further at the thought, the fear that had lingered beneath her determination, slowly transforming into something steadier, something closer to readiness. Whatever storm was approaching, whatever confrontation eventually awaited her, she intended to face it not as the frightened, uncertain girl Draven had once cast aside, but as someone fully capable of standing on her own, backed by a power that was, at long last, entirely her own to command. Then we train harder, she said simply, meeting Marin's eyes with quiet determination. Whatever time we have left, I intend to use every moment of it. Marin studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly, a flicker of pride visible in her sharp, knowing eyes. That, child, is precisely the answer I hoped you would give. Outside, beyond the walls of the small structure where they sat, the forest continued its quiet, eternal rhythm, unaware of the storm building steadily on the horizon, a storm that would soon bring together, in ways neither of them could yet fully predict, the exiled girl, who had discovered her true power, and the Alpha King, who had once believed he could simply discard her without consequence. The eastern border of Draven's kingdom had grown quiet in a way that unsettled every guard stationed along it, an uneasy silence that experienced warriors recognized as far more dangerous than any open confrontation. Alpha King Draven stood atop the watchtower overlooking the contested territory, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. "Still nothing, my lord," reported the captain of the guard, a broad-shouldered man named Garrick who had served the kingdom faithfully for over a decade. "The Ashfen pack has not made a move in 3 days, yet our scouts confirm their numbers continue to grow along the ridge." "They are waiting for something," Draven said grimly, his hands gripping the stone parapet. "Ashfen never hesitates without reason. Alpha Ronan is not a patient man by nature." "Perhaps they sense weakness," Garrick suggested carefully. "The harvest failures this season have strained our resources. If word has reached them of our difficulties, then we cannot afford to show anything resembling weakness," Draven interrupted sharply. "Double the patrols along the border. I want eyes on every approach, day and night." Garrick nodded and departed to relay the orders, leaving Draven alone atop the watchtower, staring out at the distant tree line where his enemies gathered, patient and calculating, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The weight of leadership pressed heavily on his shoulders in moments like this, the constant awareness that any sign of vulnerability could be exploited by rivals who had spent years waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. He thought, briefly and unexpectedly, of the wolfless girl he had cast out weeks earlier. The memory brought a flicker of something uncomfortable, though he quickly dismissed it as irrelevant sentiment, with no place in a mind that needed to remain focused entirely on the growing threat along his borders. She had been a problem, a symbol of weakness he could not afford to keep close during a time when every eye in the kingdom watched for any sign that their Alpha King's authority might be faltering. Still, the memory lingered longer than he expected, and he found himself wondering, briefly, whether she had survived the forest at all. Deep within the Whisperwood, unaware of the exact thoughts occupying her former king's mind but sensing, through Marin's careful reports, that tensions along the kingdom's border continued escalating, Illyra threw herself into training with an intensity that left even the settlement's most experienced fighters impressed. "Again," she said, breathing hard, sweat beading along her forehead despite the cool morning air, as she squared off against Corwin in the training clearing. "You have already beaten me 3 times this morning," Corwin protested, though he was grinning as he said it, clearly enjoying the challenge despite his repeated defeats. "At some point, you should probably practice against someone who might actually offer a real challenge. Then find me someone," Illyra shot back, though there was warmth in her tone rather than genuine irritation. As though summoned by her words, Marin appeared at the edge of the clearing, accompanied by a tall, muscular woman Illyra had not yet met, her posture radiating the kind of quiet confidence that suggested significant combat experience. "This is Sable," Marin introduced, gesturing to the newcomer. "She trains our most advanced fighters. I believe you are ready to work with her directly." Sable studied Illyra with sharp, assessing eyes, the kind of look that seemed to catalog every detail in an instant. Marin tells me you managed a full shift after only 2 weeks of training. That is unusual, to say the least. I have been told that, yes, Elira said, straightening under the scrutiny. Unusual does not always mean prepared, Sable said, her tone neither unkind nor particularly warm, simply matter of fact. Raw power means little without discipline behind it. Shall we see what you are truly capable of? Without further warning, Sable shifted, her transformation smooth and practiced, settling into a wolf form nearly as large as Elira's own, her fur a striking silver that caught the morning light beautifully, even as her posture radiated readiness for combat. Elira barely had time to shift herself before Sable lunged, testing her reflexes immediately, forcing her to dodge sideways rather than meet the attack head-on. The following exchange moved faster than anything Elira had experienced in her weeks of training with Corwin. Sable's movements precise and calculated, each strike testing a different aspect of Elira's developing skills. They circled each other for several long minutes, exchanging quick strikes and rapid dodges, Elira's raw power evident, but her technique clearly still developing compared to Sable's refined, battle-tested precision. Eventually, Sable managed to pin her, not through overwhelming strength, but through superior positioning and timing, and the match ended with Elira breathing hard beneath the larger wolf's controlled hold. Better than I expected, Sable said, shifting back to her human form and offering Elira a hand to help her rise. Your instincts are sharp, and your power is genuinely impressive for someone so new to shifting. But you rely too heavily on that power alone. Technique will matter just as much, particularly against an opponent who has spent years honing their skills. Elira nodded, accepting the criticism without resistance, understanding the value of the lesson even through her bruised pride. Will you help me improve? That is precisely why Marin brought me here, Sable confirmed, a small, approving smile finally crossing her sharp features. We begin tomorrow, at dawn. Rest well tonight. You will need it. Over the following weeks, Sable's training pushed Elira harder than anything she had experienced since arriving at the settlement. Where Marin had focused on helping her understand and control the raw power awakening within her, Sable focused entirely on refining that power into something precise, disciplined, and strategically sound. A powerful wolf who fights carelessly is simply a wolf who has not yet lost, Sable told her during one particularly grueling session. Your strength alone will not always be enough. You must learn to anticipate, to read your opponent, to use your environment and your instincts together rather than relying purely on force. Elira absorbed every lesson with the same fierce determination that had carried her through every challenge since her arrival, pushing herself through exhaustion and frustration, gradually improving with each passing session. Her matches against Sable, initially lopsided in the older woman's favor, began evening out as weeks passed, until eventually, Elira managed her first genuine victory, catching Sable off guard with a combination of speed and unexpected strategy that left the seasoned warrior genuinely impressed. You are learning faster than anyone I have trained in years, Sable admitted afterward, helping Elira up from where their match had ended. Whatever waits for you beyond this forest, I believe you will be ready to face it. News from the kingdom's eastern border continued trickling into the settlement through Marin's careful network of contacts, painting an increasingly concerning picture. The Ashfen Pack's numbers continued growing along the ridge, and skirmishes, though still limited in scale, had begun occurring with increasing frequency. Draven's kingdom, already strained by a difficult harvest season, appeared to be facing mounting pressure from multiple directions at once. If tensions continue escalating, Marin explained during one of their regular meetings, Draven may eventually seek advantages wherever he can find them, including advantages within these very woods, despite the fear that has traditionally kept outsiders away from the Whisperwood. You still believe he might come looking for me, Elira said, though it was less a question, and more a statement of understanding, that had settled steadily over the weeks since Marin first raised the possibility. I believe we must remain prepared for that possibility, Marin confirmed. Whether he seeks you specifically, or simply seeks whatever power the rumors suggest exists within these woods, the outcome for you personally would likely be similar. You must be ready, fully ready, for whatever confrontation might eventually come. Illyra nodded, feeling the familiar mixture of apprehension and resolve settle over her at the thought. Weeks earlier, the idea of facing Draven again would have filled her with nothing but fear, the lingering weight of 18 years spent believing herself unworthy of his kingdom's protection. Now, though fear still lingered somewhere beneath the surface, it had been joined by something far steadier, a growing confidence built through weeks of genuine progress, genuine growth, into a power that was, undeniably, entirely her own. That evening, as she sat with Cade near the settlement's central fire, watching flames dance and crackle against the deepening darkness, Illyra found herself reflecting on everything that had changed since her exile. The girl who had walked into this forest weeks earlier, believing herself broken and unwanted, felt like a distant memory now, replaced by someone stronger, someone who understood, finally, that her worth had never actually depended on anyone else's approval or acceptance. "Whatever happens next," she said quietly, resting a hand against Cade's warm fur, "I am ready to face it, all of it." Cade lifted his head, meeting her eyes with that same steady, knowing gaze that had comforted her since their very first meeting in this forest, and let out a low, quiet sound that felt, unmistakably, like agreement. Beyond the borders of the Whisperwood, unaware of the storm quietly gathering strength deep within the trees he had once believed harmless and forgotten, Alpha King Draven continued preparing his kingdom for whatever conflict lay ahead, entirely unaware that the greatest challenge to his authority was not approaching from the Ashfen Pack's growing numbers along the eastern ridge, but from within a forest he had long dismissed as nothing more than a convenient place to discard problems he no longer wished to face. The pieces were slowly, steadily moving into position, drawing closer with each passing day toward a confrontation that would change everything both of them believed about power, about worth, and about the true cost of the choices that had brought them, inevitably, toward this collision course neither had fully anticipated when it all began. Rain fell steadily across the settlement, drumming softly against wooden roofs and turning the training clearing into a muddy mess that Sable insisted only made for better conditioning. Illyra stood soaked to the bone, breathing hard after another intense session, watching as the older woman circled her with critical, assessing eyes. "Your footwork has improved considerably," Sable observed, wiping rain from her face. "But you still hesitate before committing to an attack. Hesitation, even for a fraction of a second, can mean the difference between victory and defeat against a truly skilled opponent." "I am working on it," Illyra replied, trying to catch her breath. "Work faster," Sable said, though not unkindly. "We do not know how much time remains before circumstances force your hand." 2 months had passed since Illyra's arrival in the Whisperwood, and the changes within her were undeniable, both in her physical capabilities and in the quiet confidence that had gradually replaced the uncertain, frightened girl who had first stumbled into this forest, seeking nothing more than survival. Her shifts had become effortless, her control over her wolf form nearly instinctive now, rather than requiring the intense concentration it once demanded. As she toweled off after the session, preparing to head toward her quarters for a change of dry clothes, Marin approached with an expression that immediately set Illyra on alert. The older woman's face carried a gravity that had become increasingly familiar over recent weeks, each visit bringing news that felt heavier than the last. "There has been a development," Marin said without preamble. "One I believe you need to hear directly." Illyra followed her toward the central meeting hall, where several settlement elders had already gathered, their expressions grave in the flickering firelight. She took a seat as instructed, sensing the weight of whatever news awaited her. "Our scouts report that Draven's kingdom suffered a significant defeat along the eastern border 3 days ago," Marin began. "The Ashfen Pack broke through a key defensive position, resulting in considerable losses among Draven's warriors. His authority within his own kingdom has been shaken as a result." "What does that mean for us?" Illyra asked, though she already suspected the answer based on weeks of similar conversations. "It means Draven now faces mounting pressure from multiple directions." An older man among the elders spoke up, his voice carrying decades of hard-earned wisdom. "Rumors of rebellion have begun circulating within his own ranks, wolves questioning whether their Alpha King remains strong enough to protect them against Ashfen's growing aggression. A desperate ruler often makes desperate choices," Marin added. Our sources indicate Draven has begun actively investigating rumors of an unusually powerful wolf spotted near the edges of the Whisperwood, hoping perhaps to recruit or capture whatever creature has been generating these whispers, believing such power might help him regain the advantage he has lost. A cold weight settled in Elira's stomach as the implications became clear. He is looking for me, or for whatever he believes I have become. It appears likely, Marin confirmed, though we cannot be certain he has connected the rumors specifically to you. It is possible he simply seeks any advantage, unaware of the wolf's true identity. Either way, Sable said from where she stood near the doorway, arms crossed. It means the confrontation we have been preparing for may arrive sooner than any of us anticipated. Elira absorbed this information silently, feeling the familiar mixture of fear and resolve settling over her once more, though the fear felt smaller now than it had weeks earlier, tempered by everything she had learned, everything she had become since her exile began. "How much time do we have?" she asked. "Impossible to say precisely," Marin admitted. "Days, perhaps, weeks at most, if we are fortunate. Draven's kingdom faces enough internal turmoil that any expedition into these woods will likely require careful planning on his part. Then we use whatever time remains as efficiently as possible," Elira said, straightening with determination. "I need to be ready, fully ready, whenever that confrontation comes." The elders exchanged glances, a mixture of approval and concern visible in their expressions. "There is something else you should know," the older man who had spoken earlier continued. "Given what we now understand about your bloodline's history and the escalating tensions surrounding Draven's kingdom, several of us believe it may be time to share more complete information about your family's past." Elira's heart quickened. "You know something about my parents?" Marin nodded slowly. "We have spent recent weeks quietly investigating old records and speaking with the settlement's oldest members. What we discovered confirms much of what I suspected when you first arrived, though it also raises new questions we have not yet fully answered." She gestured for Elira to follow her toward a smaller adjoining room, where an ancient, leather-bound book lay open on a wooden table, its pages yellowed with age. Elira approached cautiously, studying the faded text and illustrations depicting wolves unlike any she had encountered, larger, more ancient in bearing, surrounded by symbols that echoed markings she had noticed on certain trees throughout the deeper parts of the forest. "This book documents the history of the bloodline you belong to," Marin explained. "The wolves depicted here were known, in ancient times, as the First Pack, tied directly to the forest's own ancient magic, rather than to any kingdom's political hierarchy. Their power was considered nearly limitless by those who remembered the old ways, capable of commanding not just their own strength but influencing the very land around them." Elira stared at the illustrations, feeling an inexplicable pull toward the ancient images, as though some part of her recognized them on a level deeper than conscious memory. What happened to them? Why did this power nearly disappear? When the early Alpha Kings began consolidating their rule centuries ago, Marin continued, they viewed the First Pack's independence as a direct threat to the hierarchical systems they were building. Rather than risk open conflict with wolves whose power rivaled or exceeded their own, they employed powerful bindings, much like the one placed on you, suppressing the bloodline's strength across successive generations, until most descendants grew up entirely unaware of their true heritage. But some resisted, Elira guessed, studying Marin's expression carefully. "Some did," Marin confirmed. "Your family, according to the fragments we have gathered, were among the last known descendants to openly acknowledge their heritage, rather than hiding it entirely. Your parents, it seems, were quietly investigating ways to break the binding that had suppressed their bloodline for generations, hoping to restore what had been stolen, not just from themselves, but from you as well." Elira's breath caught. "You are saying they knew? They knew about this power, about what was hidden inside me?" "It appears so," Marin said gently. "Though the details of what exactly happened to them remain unclear, records from that time are fragmented, deliberately obscured, we believe by those who benefited from keeping such knowledge suppressed." "Do you think Draven's family was involved in whatever happened to them?" Elira asked, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. Marin hesitated before answering. "It is possible. The binding placed on you specifically required significant power and specific knowledge of your bloodline, knowledge that would have needed to come from somewhere close to your family, or from someone with access to considerable resources and old magical traditions. Draven's family has ruled that kingdom for many generations. It would not be unreasonable to suspect their involvement, though I cannot offer definitive proof. The revelation settled heavily over Alira, reshaping her understanding of everything that had happened, not just weeks ago when she was cast out, but potentially years earlier, before she was even old enough to remember her own parents' faces clearly. If Draven's family truly had been responsible for suppressing her bloodline's power, for potentially playing some role in whatever fate had befallen her parents, then her exile from the kingdom had not simply been cruel indifference toward an inconvenient burden. It had been, potentially, the final step in an effort that had begun long before she was even born, an effort to ensure that whatever power her bloodline carried remained buried forever, regardless of the personal cost to the family who carried it. "I need to know the truth," Alira said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotion building within her. "All of it. Whatever happened to my parents, whatever role Draven's family played, I need to understand it fully before I face him." "We will continue our investigation," Marin promised. "But some truths may only become fully clear once you confront Draven directly. He may hold answers none of these old records can provide." Alira nodded slowly, feeling the weight of everything she had learned settling into a new kind of resolve, one that extended beyond simply proving her own worth or defending herself against a kingdom that had cast her aside. Now her purpose felt larger, more significant, carrying with it not just her own future, but the legacy of a bloodline that had been systematically silenced and suppressed for generations. As evening fell, and she made her way back toward her quarters, Cade fell into step beside her as he always did, sensing perhaps the heaviness weighing on her thoughts even without fully understanding its source. Alira reached down and rested a hand against his fur, grateful, as she had been every day since their first meeting, for the steady presence he offered amid everything uncertain and overwhelming about her new reality. "We have work to do," she said quietly, more to herself than to him, though Cade let out a low sound of acknowledgement regardless. "More than I realized when I first arrived here." The forest around them settled into its familiar evening quiet, the rain finally easing into a gentle mist that clung to the trees and softened the fading light of dusk. Somewhere within that quiet, ancient landscape, the pieces of a story generations in the making continued moving steadily toward their inevitable conclusion, drawing Alira closer with each passing day, toward a confrontation that would finally reveal the full truth about her bloodline, her parents, and the kingdom that had tried so desperately to keep all of it buried forever. The great hall of Draven's kingdom buzzed with tense conversation as council members gathered for an emergency meeting, the mood far different from the confident assurance that had once characterized these gatherings. Draven sat at the head of the long table, listening to reports that grew more concerning with each passing speaker. 3 more warriors questioned the Eastern strategy openly yesterday, Garrick reported grimly. "Morale continues declining, my lord. The losses along the border have shaken confidence throughout the ranks." "And the Ashfen pack?" Draven asked, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "Alpha Ronin has sent word demanding tribute in exchange for peace," another council member reported. "Terms that would significantly weaken our kingdom's resources and standing among neighboring territories." Draven's jaw clenched. Tribute. The very word felt like an insult, a demand that would signal weakness to every rival kingdom watching the situation unfold. Yet the alternative, continued conflict against a pact that had already proven capable of breaking through his defenses, carried risks he could not easily dismiss either. "What of the rumors regarding the Whisperwood?" he asked, changing direction abruptly. "Has anyone confirmed the reports of an unusually large wolf near its borders?" A younger council member, a scout named Fenwick, who had been tasked with investigating the rumors weeks earlier, cleared his throat nervously. "Multiple sightings have been reported, my lord, from hunters and travelers who venture near the forest's edges. Descriptions vary, but all agree the creature is significantly larger than any ordinary wolf, with unusual coloring and, some claim, an intelligence in its eyes unlike typical wild wolves. Could this creature be captured, or perhaps convinced to join our ranks?" Draven pressed. "A wolf of such size and power could prove invaluable against Ashfen's forces." Fenwick hesitated before answering. The Whisperwood remains extremely dangerous, my lord. Few who venture deep within its borders return, and those who do rarely speak clearly of what they encountered. I would advise extreme caution before committing significant resources to such an expedition. Draven considered this, his mind weighing the risks against the potential reward. His kingdom's situation had grown increasingly precarious over recent weeks, and desperate circumstances, he reasoned, sometimes required desperate measures. A wolf powerful enough to generate such persistent rumors could potentially shift the balance of power significantly in his favor, whether recruited willingly or, if necessary, through other means. Assemble a small expedition, he ordered finally. Experienced warriors only, capable of handling whatever dangers the forest presents. I want this creature identified, and if possible, brought under our control. And if the wolf proves unwilling to cooperate? Garrick asked carefully. Draven's expression hardened. Then we adapt our approach accordingly. My kingdom's survival takes priority over any sentiment regarding a wild creature's preferences. The council meeting continued for another hour, addressing various other pressing concerns facing the kingdom, but Draven's mind kept returning to the rumors surrounding the mysterious wolf. Something about the timing nagged at him, though he could not immediately identify why. It had been months since he cast the wolfless girl into that very forest, and though he had not thought of her often since, something about the coincidence of her exile and the subsequent rumors felt like it deserved further consideration. He dismissed the thought quickly, however, unwilling to entertain the possibility that the powerless girl he had discarded could have any connection to a creature powerful enough to generate such persistent, awe-filled rumors. It seemed impossible, almost laughably so, given everything he had witnessed during her humiliating failure at the bonding fire months earlier. Still, as the council meeting concluded and members filed out to attend to their various duties, Draven found himself lingering in the great hall alone, staring at the spot where the bonding fire had gone cold in front of his entire kingdom, where he had delivered his judgment against a girl who had done nothing more than fail to meet expectations she had never asked to be held to. He shook his head, dismissing the uncomfortable memory, and turned his attention instead toward the pressing matters of assembling his expedition into the Whisperwood, unaware that his instincts, however quickly dismissed, had actually been pointing him directly toward the truth. Deep within the forest, unaware of the plans forming against her, Illyra continued her intensive training, her progress now attracting attention not just within the settlement but, she suspected, based on Marin's increasingly frequent updates, from beyond its protective borders as well. Your control has become remarkable, Sable observed during their morning session, watching as Illyra executed a complex series of combat maneuvers with fluid precision that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. I believe you are ready to begin training with the full Council of Elders, rather than simply myself and Marin individually. The suggestion carried significant weight within the settlement structure, and Illyra understood immediately that Sable's assessment marked a meaningful milestone in her development. She had progressed from the frightened, uncertain girl who first stumbled into this forest, believing herself broken and unworthy, into someone the settlement's most experienced warriors now considered genuinely formidable. That afternoon, she joined the full Council of Elders for the first time, a gathering of the settlement's most experienced and respected members, each carrying decades of wisdom and experience that had shaped the hidden community's survival across generations of careful, quiet existence within the feared Whisperwood. We have watched your progress with great interest, the eldest among them, a woman named Thessaly, whose age seemed almost impossible to determine, addressed Illyra directly. Your bloodline's power, awakening as rapidly as it has, confirms much of what our oldest records suggested about the First Pack's true capabilities. I am grateful for everything you have all taught me, Illyra replied respectfully, aware of the significance this gathering represented. Gratitude is appreciated, but understanding is what truly matters now, Thessaly continued. You must understand fully what your continued growth means, not just for yourself, but for the balance of power that has existed between the kingdoms and this forest for many generations. Should Draven, or any other Alpha King, learn the full truth of what you represent, the consequences could extend far beyond your personal fate. What do you mean? Illyra asked, sensing the conversation shifting towards something more significant than her individual training. The first pack's power was suppressed specifically because it threatened the hierarchical structures that Alpha Kings have built their authority upon, another elder explained. A wolf capable of commanding influence over the forest itself, rather than deriving power purely through pack dominance and conquest, represents an entirely different model of leadership, one that many rulers would view as a direct challenge to everything they have built. Alira absorbed this, understanding gradually the true scope of what her awakening power might eventually represent, not simply personal strength or the ability to defend herself, but potentially a fundamental challenge to the very systems that had allowed rulers like Draven to maintain their authority through fear and dominance, rather than genuine care for those under their protection. "What would you have me do with this understanding?" she asked. "Whatever choice you ultimately make must be yours alone," Thessaly said carefully. "But we believe you should understand fully the weight of what you carry, so that when the moment comes, as we believe it inevitably will, you approach it with complete awareness, rather than acting purely from anger or a desire for simple revenge." The words settled deeply within Alira, reshaping once again her understanding of the path ahead. She thought of Draven's cold judgment, the ease with which he had discarded her, the systematic suppression that had denied her not just her own power, but potentially the truth about her own parents' fate. Anger still lingered within her at these thoughts, understandably so, but the elder's words reminded her that whatever confrontation eventually came, her choices needed to be guided by something greater than simple vengeance. "I want to build something better," she said finally, her voice steady with growing conviction. "Not simply to punish Draven for what he did to me, but to ensure that no one else within these forests or beyond them suffers the same fate I nearly did, simply because they were born different, or because their power threatened someone else's comfortable authority." A murmur of approval moved through the gathered elders, and Thessaly's weathered face broke into a rare, genuine smile. "That, child, is precisely the wisdom we hoped your journey would eventually lead you toward. Power guided by such purpose becomes something far greater than mere strength alone." As the council meeting concluded, and Alira made her way back toward her quarters, the weight of everything discussed settling heavily but purposefully within her, she found Cade waiting patiently outside as he always did. She sat down beside him, resting against his warm, familiar presence, and allowed herself a moment to simply breathe, to process the magnitude of the path now stretching ahead of her. "They believe I could change everything," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. "Not just my own fate, but the way power works throughout these entire lands." Cade nuzzled gently against her shoulder, offering silent comfort and support as he had done so many times since their first meeting. Alira wrapped an arm around him, grateful, as always, for his steady, unwavering presence throughout everything that had changed so dramatically since her exile began. Beyond the forest's protective borders, unaware of the depth of understanding and purpose now solidifying within the girl he had once cast aside as worthless, Alpha King Draven continued preparing his expedition into the Whisperwood, entirely unprepared for the reality he would eventually discover waiting for him deep within those ancient, watchful trees. The expedition assembled at dawn. 6 of Draven's most experienced warriors gathered at the edge of the Whisperwood, their expressions a careful mixture of professional discipline and barely concealed apprehension. Garrick led the group personally, having insisted on accompanying the mission himself, despite Draven's initial reluctance to risk his most trusted captain. "Stay close together," Garrick instructed, as the group prepared to enter the tree line. "Whatever stories you have heard about this forest, treat them as truth until proven otherwise. We are not here to test old legends. We are here to identify this creature and determine whether it can be of use to our kingdom." The warriors nodded grimly and moved into the trees, the forest swallowing them within moments, its ancient canopy blocking out much of the morning sunlight and creating an atmosphere of perpetual twilight that immediately unsettled even the most seasoned among them. Draven himself had decided to join the expedition partway through its planning, unable to shake a persistent feeling that this mission required his personal attention rather than delegation entirely to his warriors. He moved through the trees alongside Garrick, his senses alert, his instincts sharpened by years of leadership and combat experience. "This place feels different from any forest I have encountered," one of the younger warriors muttered, glancing nervously at the shadows pooling between ancient trunks, almost as though it is watching us. "Focus on the mission," Garrick replied firmly, though even his tone carried a note of unease that suggested he shared the young warrior's discomfort, even if he refused to voice it openly. They pressed deeper into the forest over the following hours, following faint trails that seemed to shift and change in ways that defied normal explanation. Twice, the group found themselves circling back to locations they had already passed, despite careful attempts to maintain a consistent direction, and Draven began to understand, with growing unease, exactly why so few who ventured into these woods ever returned unchanged. Deep within the settlement, Marin's network of watchers had already detected the expedition's arrival, word spreading quickly through careful, established channels that had protected the hidden community for generations. "They have entered the eastern approach," a young scout reported breathlessly, having run considerable distance to deliver the news personally. 6 warriors, and Draven himself leads them. Alira's heart quickened at the news, the moment she had been preparing for suddenly no longer an abstract future possibility, but an immediate, pressing reality. How long before they might reach the settlement's borders? Difficult to say precisely, the scout admitted. The forest's natural defenses will slow their progress considerably, but they are experienced warriors. Perhaps 2 days, if their determination holds. Marin, who had joined the conversation, studied Alira carefully, searching for any sign of the fear that had once characterized the frightened girl who first arrived seeking shelter within these woods. She found instead a steady, focused resolve that spoke to the genuine transformation months of dedicated training had produced. "This is what we have prepared for," Marin said quietly. "The question now is how you wish to proceed." Alira considered this carefully, weighing the options available to her. She could remain hidden within the settlement, allowing the forest's natural defenses and the community's careful concealment magic to potentially discourage the expedition before it ever discovered the truth. Or she could choose a different path entirely, one that carried significant risk, but also the possibility of finally confronting, on her own terms, the reckoning that had been building since the moment Draven cast her from his kingdom. "I will not hide," she said finally, her voice carrying quiet but unmistakable conviction. "If Draven has come searching for the wolf the rumors speak of, then he should find exactly what he is looking for, on my terms, rather than through some accidental discovery that leaves me at a disadvantage." Marin nodded slowly, unsurprised by the decision, but clearly aware of its significant implications. "Then we must plan carefully. This confrontation, however it unfolds, will likely determine much about the path ahead, both for you personally and for this entire settlement's continued safety." Over the following day, Alira worked closely with Marin, Sable, and the Council of Elders to develop a strategy for the coming encounter. They discussed various scenarios, various approaches Draven's expedition might take, and prepared contingencies for each possibility they could reasonably anticipate. "You must remember," Sable emphasized during their final training session before the expected confrontation, "whatever happens, you control this encounter's outcome far more than Draven realizes. He believes he is hunting an unknown creature. He has no idea he is about to face someone who has spent months mastering exactly the kind of power he once dismissed as non-existent." Alira absorbed this reminder, feeling it settle into the steady resolve that had been building within her since the news of the expedition first arrived. Whatever fear remained, buried somewhere beneath months of hard-won confidence, she refused to let it control her actions during what she understood might be the most significant moment of her life thus far. As evening fell on the second day, word reached the settlement that Draven's expedition had made significant progress, moving closer than any outside party had come to the hidden community in many years, their persistence apparently stronger than the forest's usual deterrence typically allowed for. "They are perhaps half a day's journey from the settlement's outer boundaries," the scout reported, breathless from his rapid return. "Their pace suggests they intend to press forward regardless of the forest's usual warnings." Alira stood at the edge of the training clearing as darkness settled fully over the forest, staring out toward the direction from which Draven's expedition approached, feeling the weight of everything that had led to this moment, pressing steadily against her chest. Months of transformation, months of discovering not just her own hidden power, but a deeper truth about her family's legacy and the systematic suppression that had shaped so much of her early life, all of it converging now toward a confrontation that felt both inevitable and, despite everything, still somehow surreal. Cade appeared beside her silently, as he always seemed to know exactly when his presence was needed most. She rested a hand against his familiar warmth, drawing strength from the steady companionship that had guided her through every step of this extraordinary transformation. "Tomorrow," she said quietly, more to herself than to him, "everything changes. One way or another." Cade let out a low, steady sound, his golden eyes reflecting the last remnants of fading daylight, and Alira understood, without needing further confirmation, that whatever the following day brought, she would not face it alone. Far to the east, within a makeshift camp Draven's expedition had established for the night, the Alpha King sat near a small fire, staring into the flames with an expression that mixed determination with a growing, unexplainable unease that had settled over him steadily throughout their journey, deeper into the forest's ancient depths. Something about this forest felt different from anything he had anticipated, a presence that seemed to grow stronger with every passing hour, watchful and patient, in ways that unsettled even his considerable confidence. He found himself, unexpectedly, thinking once more of the wolfless girl he had cast out months earlier, an uncomfortable, persistent thought he could not quite explain or dismiss, no matter how firmly he tried. Tomorrow, he told himself, whatever waited within these woods would finally reveal itself, and his kingdom's fortunes would begin their long-overdue turn toward restored strength and security. He had no way of knowing, as he settled uneasily into sleep beside the dying campfire, exactly how profoundly wrong and how profoundly transformative the coming day's revelations would truly prove to be. Morning mist clung low to the forest floor as Draven's expedition pressed forward, the atmosphere growing steadily more oppressive, with each step deeper into territory none of them had ever traveled before. Garrick moved cautiously at the front of the group, his hand resting instinctively near his weapon, despite the absence of any visible threat. "My lord, look," one of the warriors called out suddenly, pointing toward strange markings carved into a nearby tree trunk, symbols none of them recognized, but which radiated an unmistakable sense of age and significance. Draven approached the markings, studying them carefully. They reminded him vaguely of old texts he had encountered during his youth, fragments of history his own father had dismissed as irrelevant legend, rather than serious historical record. A flicker of unease moved through him, though he pushed it aside quickly, unwilling to let uncertainty derail a mission his kingdom's stability increasingly depended upon. "Continue forward," he ordered. "We have come too far to turn back now, based on unfamiliar carvings." The group pressed onward, and within another hour, the forest around them began to change noticeably, the oppressive density of trees gradually giving way to a clearing unlike anything they had encountered thus far. Sunlight filtered through more freely here, illuminating what appeared to be signs of deliberate habitation, though no structures were immediately visible. "Someone lives here," Garrick observed quietly, his warrior instincts immediately alert to the implications. "This is not simply wild forest." Before Draven could respond, a low growl echoed through the clearing, resonant and powerful enough that every warrior present froze instinctively, weapons half raised as they searched for the source of the sound. From the tree line ahead, a massive shape emerged, dark-furred and golden-eyed, easily the largest wolf any of them had ever witnessed. "That is the creature," Fenwick breathed, awe and fear mixing in his voice. "That must be what the rumors described." The wolf stood watching them, its powerful frame radiating barely contained strength, its golden eyes moving deliberately across each member of the expedition before settling, with unmistakable focus, directly on Draven himself. "Steady," Draven commanded, though his own heart pounded harder than he cared to admit. "We are not here to provoke conflict. We seek only to understand what we have found." The massive wolf let out another low sound, almost as though acknowledging his words, before stepping aside, revealing a second figure emerging from the trees behind it, one that immediately stole every ounce of attention from the assembled warriors, including Draven himself. A young woman walked forward, her posture radiating a confidence and strength that felt utterly at odds with the frightened, dismissed girl Draven remembered casting from his kingdom months earlier. Yet as she drew closer, the shock of recognition crashed over him with undeniable force. "Illyra," he said, the name escaping him almost involuntarily, disbelief coloring every syllable. She stopped several paces away, meeting his gaze directly, without a trace of the fear or subservience that had once characterized every interaction between them. "Hello, Draven." "This is impossible," he said, staring at her, struggling to reconcile the composed, powerful figure before him with the wolfless girl he had discarded so casually. "You were cast into this forest to die. How is this? How are you?" "Alive?" she finished for him, a hint of bitter irony coloring her tone. "Perhaps you should have considered that possibility more carefully before condemning someone to a death you assumed was certain." Garrick and the other warriors exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the significance of this encounter, even without fully understanding its implications. The massive wolf remained close beside Illyra, its posture protective, its golden eyes never leaving Draven for more than a moment at a time. "The rumors," Draven said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn despite his continued disbelief. "The wolf everyone has been speaking of throughout the region. That is..." "Me," Illyra confirmed simply. "The wolf you claimed I would never possess. The power you were so certain did not exist within me." Draven's expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession, shock giving way to confusion, and finally, something that looked almost like calculated interest. "How is this possible? You showed no sign of any wolf spirit throughout your entire life." "Because it was suppressed," Illyra said, her voice hardening. "Bound, deliberately, so thoroughly that even I believed myself broken for 18 years. Tell me, Draven, did you know? Did your family know exactly what they were suppressing when they placed that binding on my bloodline generations ago?" The accusation hit its mark visibly, Draven's composure faltering for just a moment before he recovered, his expression carefully guarded once more. "I do not know what you are implying." "I think you do," Illyra pressed, taking a step closer, her presence radiating a quiet but unmistakable power that made several of the warriors instinctively shift backward. "My bloodline descends from the first pack, the wolves whose independence and power threatened the authority your ancestors built their kingdoms upon. Someone suppressed that power deliberately, someone with access to old magical traditions and specific knowledge of my family's heritage. Was it you? Was it your father before you? Or does this deception stretch back even further than that?" Draven's silence, stretching long and uncomfortable, spoke volumes more than any denial could have managed. Illyra watched him carefully, reading the flicker of recognition, of uncomfortable truth, that crossed his features despite his best efforts to maintain composure. "You did know," she said quietly, the realization settling with devastating weight. "Perhaps not everything, but enough. Enough to understand exactly what you were casting aside when you exiled me into this forest. Whatever my family may or may not have done generations ago," Draven said finally, his voice tight with barely controlled tension, "does not change the current circumstances my kingdom faces. Ashfen grows stronger by the day. My people need protection, need strength, and clearly, you now possess exactly the kind of power that could provide it." "You want my help?" Illyra said, disbelief coloring her voice. "After everything, after generations of suppression, after casting me out to die, you believe I would simply offer my strength to protect the very kingdom that tried so desperately to ensure I never possessed it in the first place?" "Circumstances have changed," Draven pressed, desperation beginning to leak into his carefully controlled tone. "Whatever wrongs occurred in the past, we can move forward differently. Your power, combined with my kingdom's resources and authority, could establish something far stronger than either of us could achieve separately." Illyra studied him for a long moment, watching the calculated desperation behind his words, understanding clearly that his sudden willingness to acknowledge her power stemmed not from genuine remorse, but from pure necessity, from a kingdom facing collapse, and a ruler desperate for any advantage that might restore his weakening authority. "You misunderstand something important, Draven," she said finally, her voice steady and unwavering. "I did not spend these past months training, discovering my true heritage, and mastering this power simply to hand it over to the same authority structure that tried to suppress it for generations. I have built something different here, something founded on principles your kingdom has never valued. Protection through genuine care rather than dominance through fear. She gestured slightly, and from the surrounding tree line, additional figures emerged, members of the settlement who had positioned themselves strategically throughout the clearing, prepared to support her should the confrontation escalate beyond careful diplomatic exchange. Draven's warriors shifted uneasily, suddenly aware of how thoroughly outnumbered and outmaneuvered their small expedition had become. This is not a negotiation you can win through demands or manipulation, Alira continued. The bloodline you tried to erase has survived, has grown stronger, and stands before you now, not as a subject seeking your approval, but as someone who fully understands, at last, exactly what she is truly capable of. Draven's jaw clenched, his mind clearly racing through the rapidly narrowing options available to him. He glanced briefly at Garrick, whose expression suggested he too recognized the precariousness of their current position, vastly outnumbered within unfamiliar territory, against a power neither of them had fully anticipated. "What is it you want then?" Draven asked finally, his tone carrying grudging acknowledgement of the shifted dynamics between them. "If not to join my kingdom's cause, what outcome do you seek from this encounter?" Alira met his gaze directly, feeling the full weight of months of transformation, of discovered heritage, of hard-won strength converging into this singular, defining moment. "I want the truth, first and completely, and then, I want you to understand clearly that whatever authority you once held over my life ended the moment you cast me into this forest, believing it would be my death." The clearing fell into tense silence, every figure present, from Draven's uncertain warriors to the settlement's watchful defenders, waiting to see how this unprecedented confrontation between the discarded Omega and the Alpha King who once condemned her would ultimately unfold. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unspoken across months of separation and transformation. Draven stood rigid, his warriors watching him carefully, waiting for direction that did not come easily, given the unprecedented nature of the situation they found themselves within. "The truth," Draven said finally, his voice quieter than before, stripped of some of its earlier authority. "You want to know what my family knew, what role we played in suppressing your bloodline?" "Yes," Alira confirmed simply. Draven glanced briefly at his warriors before continuing, seeming to make a calculated decision that honesty, at this point, offered better prospects than continued denial. "My father spoke of it only once, years ago, when I was young enough that I barely understood the significance of what he described. He mentioned an old bloodline, one considered dangerous by our ancestors generations ago, a family whose power threatened the stability of the kingdoms our family had worked to build. And when I was born into your kingdom," Alira pressed, "when the truth of my heritage became apparent, what happened then?" "I do not know the full details," Draven admitted, and something in his tone suggested genuine uncertainty rather than calculated deception. "My father passed before explaining everything fully. I inherited certain old texts, certain traditions I was taught to maintain, without always understanding their complete purpose. If a binding was placed upon your bloodline, it likely occurred through methods and knowledge that predated even my own understanding of our family's history." Alira studied him carefully, searching for deception but finding, to her surprise, something that looked more like genuine, uncomfortable uncertainty. It did not excuse his cruelty, his casual dismissal of her worth throughout 18 years of her life, but it complicated the narrative she had constructed in her mind, one where Draven himself bore full, deliberate responsibility for everything that had happened to her family. "That does not excuse what you did to me," she said firmly. "Whether or not you fully understood the history behind my suppressed heritage, you still chose cruelty. You still chose to humiliate and discard someone who had done nothing but serve your kingdom faithfully for 18 years. "You are right," Draven said, and the acknowledgement seemed to cost him considerable effort, his pride visibly straining against the admission. "I judged you unfairly, based on assumptions I never bothered questioning. I saw only what appeared to be weakness, and I acted according to fears about my own authority, rather than genuine understanding of your actual worth." The admission hung in the air between them, and Alira felt something complicated shift within her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, The wound remained too significant for that, but perhaps something closer to a grudging acknowledgement that the man before her was beginning, however belatedly, to recognize the full weight of his actions. "What happens now?" Garrick asked carefully, breaking the tense silence that had settled over the clearing, his warrior's practicality cutting through the emotional weight of the exchange between Draven and Illyra. Illyra turned her attention to the practical question, understanding that whatever personal reckoning had occurred between herself and Draven, larger circumstances still demanded resolution. "Your kingdom faces genuine threat from the Ashfen pack. That much, at least, appears true regardless of everything else discussed here today." "It is," Draven confirmed. "My people's safety remains my genuine priority, whatever mistakes I have made regarding your treatment." Illyra considered this carefully, weighing the various paths available to her. Revenge, she recognized, would offer only temporary satisfaction, unlikely to address the deeper systemic issues that had allowed her suppression and exile to occur in the first place. Yet simply forgiving Draven and returning to serve his kingdom as though nothing had happened felt equally impossible, a betrayal of everything she had discovered about herself and her heritage over these transformative months. "I will not return to your kingdom as a subject," she said finally, her voice carrying quiet but unmistakable authority. "That chapter of my life has ended permanently. However, I am willing to consider an alliance between this settlement and your kingdom, one built on mutual respect, rather than the hierarchy that previously governed our relationship." Draven's expression shifted with surprise. "An alliance? Between equals?" "Precisely," Illyra confirmed. "This forest holds power your kingdom has never fully understood or respected. The community here has thrived for generations by valuing protection and genuine care over dominance and fear. If your kingdom is willing to acknowledge that different approach as legitimate, rather than simply useful when convenient, then perhaps we can discuss cooperation against the Ashfen threat." Thessaly, who had emerged from the tree line, along with the other settlement defenders, stepped forward to stand beside Illyra, her ancient, weathered presence adding significant weight to the proposal. "The choice, Alpha King, is entirely yours. But know this, whatever decision you make today will shape not just your kingdom's immediate future, but the relationship between your authority and the truth this forest has protected for generations." Draven looked between Illyra and Thessaly, then glanced briefly at his own warriors, whose expressions suggested they too recognized the significance of the moment unfolding before them. Finally his gaze returned to Illyra, studying her with an expression that held, for the first time since their encounter began, something that looked almost like genuine respect, rather than calculated necessity. "I accept," he said finally, "an alliance between equals, built on mutual respect. My kingdom will honor this settlement's independence and the legitimacy of your leadership here, in exchange for cooperation against threats that endanger us both." Illyra nodded slowly, satisfaction and lingering wariness mixing within her at the agreement's conclusion. "This alliance begins with full transparency. I want access to whatever records your family maintains regarding my bloodline's suppression, and whatever information exists about my parents' fate. You will have it," Draven promised. "Whatever remains within my kingdom's archives regarding this history, I will ensure it is shared fully and honestly." As the tension within the clearing gradually eased, replaced by the careful beginnings of a new, more balanced relationship between the exiled bloodline and the kingdom that had once tried to suppress it, Illyra felt Cade press close against her side, his presence steady and reassuring, as it had been throughout every step of her extraordinary transformation. Over the following weeks, the alliance between the settlement and Draven's kingdom developed steadily, careful negotiations establishing terms that honored the independence and legitimacy Illyra had insisted upon from the very beginning. Records were shared, revealing painful but important truths about her parents' final years, about the sacrifices they had made attempting to protect their daughter's hidden heritage, even as forces beyond their control worked steadily to suppress it. The combined strength of Draven's warriors and the settlement's skilled defenders proved decisive against the Ashfen Pack's continued aggression, forcing Alpha Ronan to reconsider his expansionist ambitions in the face of a unified, significantly strengthened opposition. Peace, hard-won and carefully maintained, gradually returned to the contested eastern border. Elira herself continued growing into her role as the settlement's newest and most powerful defender. Her leadership style, guided by everything she had learned throughout her transformative months of training and discovery, gradually reshaping not just her immediate community, but influencing, slowly and steadily, the broader relationship between the various kingdoms and the ancient forest they had once feared and dismissed. Standing atop the same ridge where she had first glimpsed the vast, untamed beauty of the Whisperwood months earlier, Elira watched the sun set across the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Cade sat beside her, as he always did, his presence a constant reminder of everything she had discovered about herself since that first terrifying night of exile. She thought of the frightened, uncertain girl who had once believed herself broken beyond redemption, dismissed and discarded by a kingdom that valued conformity over genuine understanding. That girl felt like a distant memory now, replaced by someone who had discovered not just extraordinary power, but a deeper truth about her own worth, one that had never actually depended on anyone else's approval or acceptance. "We built something worth protecting," she said quietly, resting a hand against Cade's familiar warmth. "Something better than what I left behind." Cade let out a low, contented sound, his golden eyes reflecting the brilliant colors of the setting sun, and Elira smiled, genuine and unguarded, feeling for the first time in her entire life a complete, unshakable sense of belonging exactly where she stood. The forest around them settled into its familiar evening quiet, ancient and patient as it had always been, having witnessed the beginning of a transformation that would echo far beyond its own borders, shaping the future not just of one exiled Omega who discovered her true power, but of the very systems and structures that had once believed such power could be suppressed and silenced forever. It could not. It never truly had been. And now, standing strong within the forest that had given her everything the kingdom once denied her, Elira understood completely that whatever challenges still awaited in the years ahead, she would face them not as the wolfless Omega once cast aside, but as the powerful, respected leader she had always been destined to become.